Thank you very much, Maureen. I've never used one of these mics before. When Damon mic'd me up, I remarked this is a Kate Bush mic, because if anyone can go back to the 70s and 80s, she was the first pop singer to utilize this form of technology. I'm not a very good dancer, and I don't look fantastic in a leotard, but then might surprise you. So the talk is entitled Soul, Personality, and the Rainbow Bridge. We got blank. The famous esoteric axiom, as above, so below, relates to the fact that the divine life, which pervades our entire universe, tends to display similar qualities in the various forms which it activates and expresses itself through. We therefore witness analogies of the process of spiritual transformation within the lower kingdoms of nature. The production of diamonds in the mantle of the earth occurs under particular conditions of intense pressure and extreme temperature. This offers us an analogy of the alchemical process, where its practitioners sought to transmute the base metal of the transient, corruptible human personality into the shining, radiant, eternal, incorruptible gold of the soul, or higher self. The alchemists achieved this by virtue of the unifying of opposites. From a psychological perspective, this relates to the union of the conscious and the unconscious components of the human psyche. The unconscious, including, of course, what we refer to as the soul or higher self. We also witness an analogy of the archetypal process of spiritual transformation in the various stages of a flowering plant. It's worth noting here that at the stage prior to flowering, the plant will send all of its energy up to the bud in an effort to flower, despite however challenging or testing the conditions may be here. And similarly, when we tread the spiritual path, we are tested in terms of ignoring the cravings of our lower nature and the various circumstances of the outer world. We do this in favor of effecting spiritual transformation, and we are likely to face many challenges when we embark upon the spiritual path. The soul will test us as a means of ascertaining our worthiness as an instrument of expression, whilst also seeking to offload karma at a more rapid rate. The analogy depicted by the life cycle of the butterfly is a particularly apt metaphor here. The initiates of ancient Egypt considered the masses of the country to be in the larva stage of development, whereas the intelligentsia and the initiates were able to proceed to the pupal and imago states. We witness this in the concept of the winged pharaoh arising from the sarcophagus or pupal case. Picture of a caterpillar now. The caterpillar represents humanity in its common state of awareness, of waking sleep. The Hindus, of course, refer to this as Maya. This is where the underlying one divine life appears as many separate and distinct lives, and the transient phenomenal world appears as real and enduring. This is the restricted level of ordinary subject-object consciousness. In his famous cave analogy, in his work The Republic, Plato illustrated this. He likened the ordinary state of wakened consciousness to that of a prisoner observing shadows cast upon a wall, unaware that these phantom apparitions were derived from the activity of the causal realms. The life of the caterpillar, then, represents a two-dimensional form of consciousness. Its movement is confined to crawling around on surfaces, and its primary concern is that of eating. Like the majority of humanity, it views life from a strictly utilitarian perspective. And of course, our political and economic systems are devised on this basis at this point in time. It's important to note here that the following chrysalis stage relates to a process of withdrawal, where the caterpillar finds a safe place, safe, sheltered spot, within which it may pupate within its chrysalis. Those unaware of what is happening here may perceive the caterpillar as simply being idle or dormant. However, an immense change is taking place, a transformation which will enable it to penetrate into new and higher dimensions. The symbolism of the chrysalis stage corresponds to that of the hanged man of the tarot deck. This represents a spiritual aspirant subjecting themselves to the forces of the unconscious and all that this entails, as one must address energies of both an evolutionary and an involutionary nature. The symbolism of this particular card is held to represent the first entry into a sequence of states of increasing union with the divine. You can see the figure there, upside down. It's in a state of suspension, in the shape of a pilfered cross or swastika. This represents the process of becoming, whereby the spiritual aspirant is increasingly attuned to the divine energies which underlie creation. The figure is reversed, symbolizing the suspension of one's ordinary state of consciousness, leading to an overturning of their perspective due to the attainment of a higher, spiritually based level of awareness. In my study group, not trying to plug it by the way, but we're going to consider the Norse myth of Odin suspended on the cosmic ash of Yggdrasil. This is also representative of this process. Odin sought to obtain the secrets of the runes. There is a correspondence here with the runes in what Carl Jung referred to as archetypes or divine ideas, these being the structuring and conditioning agents of evolution. As Theosophists, we would say the projective thoughts of the solar logos and planetary logos. And an understanding of the archetypes enables one to access and interact with their energies as a means of furthering evolution. When Odin sought to acquire the secret of the runes, he was seeking to reveal and consciously express their magical qualities as a means of furthering the evolutionary process. This is in accord with Carl Jung's individuation process, whereby the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche are unified, giving rise to what he referred to as the transcendent function of the psyche, which he named the self, which we would call the soul or higher self as the instrument of the monad. This mirrors in Theosophy what we refer to as the third initiation. This occurs when a fully integrated personality, stable under all situations of involvement with the outer world, having learnt the many necessary lessons on the various rounds of the zodiacal wheel, has been transformed into an effective spiritual instrument. And when one has successfully scaled the symbolic mountain of initiation, they gain conscious access to the archetypes and their numerous energies. We would say they gain a portion of the divine or evolutionary plan. Returning to our analogy, the butterfly, we see here, emerging from the chrysalis stage, symbolizes what we often refer to as cosmic consciousness. And unlike the caterpillar, the butterfly has freedom of movement. It lives in space but is able to return to the surface. It can therefore understand relationships occurring within the realm of the caterpillar, but it's aware of an entirely higher dimension which the caterpillar is completely oblivious to. And just as the world of the butterfly is incomprehensible to that of the caterpillar, similarly, the level of cosmic consciousness is meaningless to the individual who is yet to glimpse reality beyond the ordinary state of subject-object consciousness. In terms of Plato's cave analogy, the butterfly represents one who has removed the shackles imposed upon them by the five senses and the desire nature, and has turned to experience the light of the causal realms, and perhaps treaded upwards and out of the cave to confront the sunlight of their spiritual essence. As a means of effecting such a metamorphosis, we must then tread the spiritual path which leads to the very source of our being. whereby we may function as an effective spiritual instrument in our everyday life. In my book, The Inner Journey, which is over there on one of the shelves, I give a brief synopsis of the esoteric human constitution. We're going to look at it here. Most of you probably know this. This is an illustration from the book. Theosophy informs us that, in essence, we are indivisible sparks of a divine flame, referred to as monads. The monads have their being upon the upper levels of consciousness of a vast evolutionary scheme. As monads, we are engaged upon a long evolutionary journey to develop and express hitherto latent qualities, and in the process acquire what is referred to as spiritual staying power. This being our ability to radiate and express spiritual qualities despite the many restrictions imposed upon us by physical inclination and its associated maya. Our success in this respect contributes to the evolution of the greater being which we are a part of, the Solar Logos. And it is to the Solar Logos that we return at the conclusion of our evolutionary sojourn. This is depicted on the blank. Well, the biblical tale of the return of the prodigal son is an allegory for this process. Due to its purity, the monad cannot contact the planes of consciousness below it, so it adopts structures or mechanisms which can function at these lower levels. The soulless or higher self, which is commonly symbolized as a lotus-like structure, is a reflection of the monad. It serves as its instrument upon the planes of consciousness below it. The unfoldment of the symbolic lotus petals of the soul is a process involving many lives in human form. It is only upon successfully learning every lesson that life in physical form has to offer that we are released from the wheel of rebirth, which has then served its purpose to unfold the flower of the soul and to enable the monad to obtain its objective of acquiring spiritual staying power. And the solar higher self is the repository of the essences of our experiences on earth, gained throughout our many lives. And we as human personalities function as instruments of the soul in the lower worlds of creation. We unfold the symbolic petals of the soul by expressing its qualities, which Theosophy refers to as Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Atma relates to divine persistent will. And there will be times in our lives where we are challenged to symbolically cling to a precipice on the mountain of initiation, whilst all around us is crumbling, seeking to raise our consciousness on the various challenges which confront us in life as part of the overall evolutionary process. We must also develop the quality of Buddhi, which can be summarized by the phrase love wisely applied and wisdom lovingly applied. This is closely related to the opening of the heart chakra. We'll look at heart chakras a little bit later on. And we must also endeavor to develop the quality of abstract thought, or higher manas. This relates to our ability to think about matters beyond those of our survival instincts and the fulfillment of our various desires. We can develop abstract thought through a study of the arts, philosophy, esoteric writings, and particularly through the symbolism of myth and the imagery associated with dreams and meditation. The quality of higher manas represents a current frontier of human consciousness. It is also a key towards us constructing the Ankakarana, or rainbow bridge, which links the soul to the personality. We'll be looking at that a little bit later. The personality is the instrument of the soul. The Latin word persona describes the mask worn by the Roman actor, indicating the role which they happen to be playing. And this is a very apt description for the mechanism of the soul. Indeed, we may say that the diverse forms contained within our world serve as masks which obscure the underlying one divine life. And it is by undertaking the disciplines and practices of the spiritual path, that we are eventually able to realize that the various names and forms of our world are derived from the divine sound, the Om, and that we are in essence a spark of the divine, part of a unified consciousness, which is immanent, yet also transcendent of creation. There are existential factors at play when we tread the spiritual path. We each have our own unique evolutionary history, which is accumulated over our many lives. We also each have an individual soul's purpose, which is always related to the intent of the greater being which the soul is a part of, which Theosophy refers to as the planetary logos. It can assist us towards ascertaining the purpose of the soul through meditation, through ray analysis, and through esoteric astrology. There are three particular means of ascertaining the purpose of the soul. Not exclusive, but they're very reliable. I'm an esoteric astrologer. My good friend Ted Capstick, who many of you know is also an esoteric astrologer. However, when we tread the path, there are standard, time-honored practices that we can all adopt. The spiritual path presents us with a challenge in terms of transmuting our desires into spiritual aspiration, in overcoming our various habits, impulses, complexes, and prejudices as a means of functioning as an effective instrument of the soul. No, we're going too far here. Right. It's not showing, never mind, but we talk of the soul as possessing three tiers of petals of knowledge, love, and sacrifice. And the wisdom teachings advise us to undertake the necessary and interrelated practices of study of the wisdom teachings, classical esoteric teaching, study, meditation, as a means of connecting with the soul, building the antakarana, and sacrifice. Study, meditation, sacrifice through spiritual service. Spiritual service serves to unfold the sacrifice petals of the soul. And these practices, followed in unison, allow us to unfold in a balanced manner, in a way whereby we may attune the personality to the higher octave of the soul and function as an effective spiritual instrument. We can take an important step on our spiritual journey by recognizing that everything comes from within. As the wisdom teachings advise us, the innermost aspect of our being is divine. And from this source, there flows inspiration, aspiration, altruism, love, wisdom, compassion, self-sacrifice, and all other factors which can ennoble humanity. The personality, if you look to the left of the slide here, is comprised, as you know, of the physical, astral, and mental bodies. And when we seek to effect spiritual transformation, it's important that these three vehicles and associated elements of our character are integrated into a fully functioning, coherent structure. This enables us to incorporate the energies and qualities of the higher self so that we may function as an instrument of the soul in our everyday lives. In terms of our physical body, we can adopt practices such as cleanliness, the use of water, a nutritious diet, the intake of fresh air, exposure to sunlight, and I don't get very much of that up in Scotland, I must say. However, when we tread the path, we're advised not to overemphasize physical purification at the expense of higher, more important practices. And spiritual development is very closely related to our ability to exert control over the astral body and the various desires which originate here. This is particularly important as we tread the path, the overcoming, transmutation, and sublimation of our desire nature. The energies of the astral plane, from which the astral body is derived, are focused upon the solar plexus chakra, which we see illustrated here, which is located in the abdominal region. The astral body will synthesize the energy, the solar plexus chakra. Via the solar plexus chakra, the astral body will synthesize the forces of the astral plane, which enter it. And we may then use these either in fulfillment of our various desires, or preferably in the expression of spiritual and creative things. And the key towards achieving the latter is through the transmutation of the energies of the solar plexus chakra into those of its higher counterpart, the heart chakra, which is related to the Buddhic plane. This emphasizes the importance of us expressing unconditional and inclusive forms of love, rather than love of a selfish or jealous nature. It's not that we should love those who surround us less, but rather that love is extended outwards, expressed in altruistic and humanitarian ways. Other heart chakra qualities include those of compassion, harmlessness in thought, word, and deed, discrimination. Discrimination, we mean between the real and the unreal, between the spiritual and transient. My good friend Ted's going to talk about that in his talk later in the week. And we must also express the quality of courage. We must demonstrate the courage of the questing heroes of myth when we embark upon the spiritual path. This provides us with a means of overcoming fear, which is centered in the solar plexus chakra. As Madame Blavatsky famously stated, when one treads the path, all that is good and all that is evil surface. And courage is therefore a most important quality, as we're required to confront and overcome our lower nature, including its accumulated effects over our many lives in the form of the dweller on the threshold. My friend David Harvey is going to talk about that tomorrow morning, I believe. It's also chapter 23 of my book. Ted's laughing, it's a private joke. The most subtle of our personality bodies is the mental body, derived from the substance of the mental world, comprised of the 4 lowest mental subplanes. If you look to the left, the mental body is found in the realm which is described as rupa, or form. The higher mental world and beyond is arupic, or formless, rupa being a Sanskrit word for form. We're going to consider this very important aspect a little bit later. Just the thought processes of the mind or mental body, which enable us to function in the physical world, function effectively. However, from a spiritual perspective, the mind represents a limitation. As Madame Blavatsky states in The Voice of the Silence, the mind is the slayer of the real. It stands between the spiritual aspirant and the higher self. Its constant chatter deafens us to the inner voice. In Buddhism, the undisciplined mind is metaphorically described as the chattering monkey. Because it has a restless and unsettled nature, the mind is in constant movement. It will assume the forms and colours of everything that's presented to it by the 5 senses, our imagination, our emotions, and our memory. And it can be very, very challenging to try and focus on one single thought, because almost immediately associated thoughts occur, because the mind's in constant movement. In the vast majority of humanity, thoughts are driven by the desire nature, what we refer to in Theosophy, and what the Hindus call karma manas, mind-driven or contaminated by desire. And the lower mind is anchored to this physical world of duality. It understands the objects, the circumstances of this world by means of comparison, and is continually caught between opposites here, which the mind itself largely creates. Spiritual truth, however, embraces rather than separates opposites. Spiritual truth is found not on the level of duality, but by experience of the underlying oneness. In terms of mythological symbolism, we are challenged, like the classical hero Jason, to sail beyond the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, which represent the opposites of manifestation. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta employ the analogy of a pond being rippled by the wind to describe the various machinations of the lower mind and its fascination with the objects of the outer world. And when the wind causes ripples on the surface of the pond, only broken images of the objects surrounding the pond can be seen as reflection. However, if we can still the water, we can perceive that image in its entirety and see beneath the surface. The vast majority of humanity identify with these flickering images as shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. However, when we practice meditation, in accordance with the great yoga teachings, we are seeking to still the mind so that we may perceive our underlying spiritual essence. Returning to the great esoteric axiom, as above, so below, we say in the wisdom teachings that creation arises through the projected thought of a transcendent being. And we adopt our mental creations in a similar manner. When treading the path, our mind and the mental images which it produces should be in accord with the intent of the soul, rather than being incited by the desire nature. It is the undisciplined imagination that allows the objects of the external world to exert their control over us, whereby we succumb to their maya, whereas a controlled imagination enables us to lead our thoughts into directions appropriate to our spiritual development and growth. If you look at the diagram here, we see the personality symbolized as a downward-facing triangle, and the soul represented as an upward-facing triangle, and there is a bridging link there. This is what we refer to as the Antakarana, or rainbow bridge. And when we aspire towards spiritual growth, the soul rewards us with deluges of energy which pass down this channel, flooding into the aura, infusing the chakras above the diaphragm, particularly those of the heart and the head. This structure has been symbolically represented in myth. In the biblical book of Genesis, it is represented by Jacob's ladder, whilst in Norse myth, which we're going to consider in my study group, the Antakarana is depicted as Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, which links Midgard, the realm of humanity, to Asgard, the world of the gods. And the construction of the Antakarana is achieved through spiritual practices, particularly meditation and especially the practice of abstract thought. This level of awareness transcends that of the human intellect, and by engaging in the practice of abstract thought, we are able to liberate the mind from karma manas. And when we tread the path, then, we seek to align our intent to that of the soul. How do we obtain such guidance and direction? By what means does the immortal aspect of our being convey its intent to us? And in what language does this occur? Carl Jung famously stated that archetypes, or divine ideas, are represented within the human psyche as symbols. Archetypes surface in our consciousness through our dreams and meditations, and through what Jung described as synchronicities, where there is a concurrence with the subjective mind and the outer objective world. And it is via the Antakarana that the contents of the causal or arupic levels of creation are conveyed to us, primarily through the medium of symbolic language. Now, I quote from my book here, the 20th century Indologist Heinrich Zimmer, the mentor of Joseph Campbell, he had a long-standing relationship with Jung. And just to prove it, there's in fact, it's the wrong, yeah, it is that one, sorry. In his work, Philosophies of India, one of my favorite books on Eastern teachings, Zimmer states, and this is over 150 words, but it's the best ever quote I've come across on symbolism, so I'm going to read it to you. Zimmer states, for the ultimate and real task of philosophy, according to Indian thought, and to such classical Occidental philosophers as Plato, transcends the power of task and reason. Access to truth demands a passage beyond the compass of ordered thought, and by the same token, the teaching of transcendent truth cannot be by logic, but only by pregnant paradox and by symbol and image. When a carefully reasoned thinker, progressing step by step, would be forced to halt, out of breath as it were, at the confines of the stratosphere, panting for lack of oxygen, swooning with pulmonary and cardiac distress, the mind can still go on. The mind can soar and enter the supernal sphere on the wings of symbols, which represent the truth beyond pairs of opposites. Eluding by those wings the bird net of the basic principle of earthbound human logic. For what transcendent means is the transcending, among other things, of the bounding and basic logical laws of the human mind. Jung illustrated that many dreams present us with images and associations which are analogous to primitive ideas, myths and rites. These primitive ideas representing humanity's early attempt to understand and access, utilize the energies of the archetypes. Jung also stated that symbols offer us or represent natural attempts to reconcile the opposites within the human psyche, ultimately leading to a level of being transcending the duality of the manifest world. And of course, dreams are common to the entire human race. They give the higher self the perfect opportunity to impress the personality when the various personality vehicles are still. The soul may also employ symbolic imagery as a means of offering us creative inspiration. Famous examples of this include the German organic chemist Kidgel. He derived his understanding of the molecular structure of the benzene as a closed carbon ring when he dreamt of a symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake biting onto its tail, which of course features in our logo. The symbol of infinity, the symbol of life, death, and rebirth. And Jung perceived this as a symbol of wholeness, whereby the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche are unified. Niels Bohr dreamt of a day at a racecourse, which led him to realize that the various lanes on the racetrack symbolized the fixed and specific orbit of electrons circulating around atomic nuclei. So if we are able to understand the language of the unconscious, whose characters are comprised of symbols and images, then we can obtain guidance and direction from within and lead a more spiritually effective life. The wisdom teachings inform us of Maya, of how the forms of the outer world and our various experiences in life are of a transient nature, and that they serve to obscure the underlying one life. However, it's a most fascinating esoteric fact that the forms which we perceive in life, the experiences which we undergo, which psychologists would describe as our ex externa, and which are stored at the etheric level of the brain in its memory banks, these can be utilized in really innumerable ways by the soul in terms of symbolic language, thereby giving us our own personal existential language of the unconscious. Jung himself emphasized the symbol-making propensity of the human psyche, and that consciousness serves not only to translate the contents of the outer world via the five senses, but also in translating into visible reality the contents of the inner worlds. And of course, symbols are spontaneous and autonomous productions of the psyche. We do not create our symbols, rather we discover them because they are coming from the arupic level of consciousness, the causal realms of existence, that of the soul. Jung's famous quote on symbolism, probably the best one: any word or image is symbolic or becomes a symbol when it implies something more than its obvious and immediate meaning. It has a wider unconscious aspect that is never precisely defined or fully explained. As the mind explores the symbol, it is led to ideas that lie beyond the grasp of reason, or we would say, led into the realm of abstract thought, or higher manas. Dream interpretation varies depending on the level of our being, which the corresponding archetype is seeking to inform us of. And when we interpret symbols, we must be aware of their different layers of meaning, and of how the same symbol can mean different things to the individual who perceives it. And this meaning can change depending upon the context in which the symbol is placed. We see an image here of Mercury, the cycle pomp, the emissary of the gods, the aspect of the higher self which assists us on our evolutionary journey. However, Mercury can also be a trickster, and we must be very careful when we are analysing the contents of the inner worlds. And also in our meditations, etc., when we are receiving information from within, we must be able to discriminate, as Ted would tell you, between what is genuinely coming from the causal realms and what is simply our imaginings or the products of the astral plane. And we must all search within our own unconscious for our particular existential symbols. There will be instances in our subjective lives where symbols very personal to us occur, and the challenge for us is to recognize and interpret these according to the intent of the higher self. Going to look at a couple of symbols here. I mean, there are many symbols that possess a general meaning. Jung referred to these as motifs. Although we must stress here that, like any other symbol, they must be considered within the context of the dream or meditation imagery, rather than being simply self-explanatory. Here's a symbol of the cave. This is generally held to represent something of a subjective nature. It's not rocket science, is it? A cave is a deep structure. It is hidden from public view. Therefore, it may indicate something deep or hidden within the realms of the psyche. The cave, of course, is also obscured from public view, and it may be a symbol suggesting a process of withdrawal, whereby we, butterfly-like, may find a place to safely pupate within our chrysalis as a means of effecting spiritual growth, withdrawing from our engagement with the transient affairs of the outer world as a means of effecting spiritual transformation. The symbol of the cave may also allude to the cave of the heart, which we enter in meditation. Here's the symbol of the motor car, another very common one, which represents the personality as the vehicle of the soul. We must pay attention here to the condition of the car which we happen to be driving if this occurs within a dream. Our ability towards controlling the car. Has anyone ever had a dream of a car we can't control or driving in with? Like me, I am Libra rising, which rules motor cars in esoteric astrology, and certainly in the past it's very common for me to have such dreams. So our ability towards controlling the car, pursuing the appropriate direction, our capacity to adhere to the highway code, all these sort of things we can take into account as a means of ascertaining our relation to the soul, what we're doing in our life, is it appropriate, and so on. When I was aged about 30, I'd spent about 5 or 6 years studying the esoteric, primarily the Western mystery tradition and traditional astrology. I then came across Theosophy, the works of Alice Bailey, and so on, and began studying these. And I had a dream of an indigo sports car. It was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I don't even drive. For me to enthuse about the car, that's saying something. But I wasn't in the car. I was looking at it, saying, how the hell am I going to learn to drive that? And I thought that was a very appropriate dream at the time. Just to digress slightly, in esoteric astrology, dogs are related to the sign of Pisces and can represent energies of the unconscious. Last night I had a dream that I managed to, how would I put it? It was a Rottweiler dog, and I had my hand in its mouth. It didn't bite me. Then, a la the dog whisperer, I put the dog down, and it basically saw me as the leader of the pack. And started following me around, being affectionate towards me, and so on. So I thought that was a very profound dream. And usually events like these, things happen like that. There is that energy which we connect, which we create when we are all connected in physical space. But I thought that was quite a fascinating dream. So to conclude then, I've given a brief introduction to the spiritual path, the esoteric human constitution, and the importance of constructing the Antakarana, or rainbow bridge, which links soul and personality. And towards these ends, I've emphasized the requirement of developing abstract thought. Theosophy, of course, informs us that the Lemurian root race served to open the sacral chakra, the Atlantean, the solar plexus chakra. And this fifth root race, the Aryan, serves the purpose of opening the throat chakra. And this is done through developing the mental body, which is currently only half formed. It functions very well at the level of intellect. But we are babies in terms of the expression of abstract thought. Hence, I feel this is very, very important. I've emphasized it's the frontier of human consciousness. I feel we should not talk glibly about the sixth root race of intuition whenever that's going to come about, depending upon which theosophical writer you read. But first, we must do the hard work. We are spiritual pioneers. We have been presented with these teachings, this opportunity, and therefore I would like to emphasize that the development of abstract thought is very, very important. Concluding then, Theosophy uses the term Devashan in reference to the true heaven state, where the soul rests between incarnations. Devashan is a state of spiritual consciousness which is commensurate with our spiritual efforts of the previous life. This is where the aspirations of that life are developed into faculty, the experiences converted into wisdom. Mahayana Buddhism uses the term Sakavati, the realm of bliss. Sakavati, as indicated on the slide, it was the most appropriate one I could find, is described as a lake containing many lotuses which represent the souls of humanity. And these are at different stages in terms of the opening of their petals and flowering. Some are fully open, displaying their beauty, emitting their fragrance, whereas others are simply at the stage of budding. In terms of the wisdom teachings, we would say that the lotus of the soul represents a bud in terms of the young soul, an opening lotus with 3 tiers of petals in relation to one who is treading the spiritual path, and a resplendent blossom containing a blazing, radiant jewel in the lotus in the spiritual initiate. And it's important to bear in mind, when we undertake the disciplines of the spiritual path, we not only contribute to our own spiritual evolution, but also to that of humanity and to the greater beings which we are a part of, the planetary Logos and solar Logos. And on this basis, our spiritual endeavors, the expression of Atma, Buddhi, and Kaya Manas, and the expression of higher Manas, building the Antakarana, serve not only to unfold the symbolic lotus petals of our soul, but also to metaphorically water and replenish the souls of others, and in the process, creating a planetary Antakarana as a means of facilitating what may be described as a heaven on earth. Now, it's been a great honor for me to speak to you all today, and I wish everyone a very fruitful and productive summer school.